In the dust-choked towns of the Old West, words often carried more weight than bullets. One night, beneath the glow of lantern light in a weather-beaten saloon, a woman's voice cut through the murmur of gamblers and drifters. Her accusation was sharp, born of a lifetime of broken promises. "You only want me for my body." The room fell into silence, for everyone there had heard such stories before. Men taking what they pleased and leaving nothing behind but shame. Yet the cowboy who stood before her was not like the others. His reply came not with anger, nor with drunken laughter, but with a steady gaze and a quiet truth that made the whole room lean closer. "No," he said, his voice low but firm, "I want all of you." The woman's eyes narrowed, as though daring him to prove what so many before had failed to deliver. In a world where love was often bought and sold, where hearts were guarded behind walls higher than any frontier canyon, trust was a luxury few could afford. To give herself fully meant risking everything: her dignity, her freedom, her fragile hope that she was worth more than desire. And yet, in that moment, with the weight of the cowboy's words pressing against her defenses, the question lingered. Could he mean it? Could someone see her not as a fleeting body in the night, but as a soul deserving to be cherished? The saloon air grew heavy, filled with anticipation. Men paused mid-hand in their poker games, and even the bartender froze with a glass half-polished in his hand. They had heard countless confessions and denials in their time, but rarely a man willing to bare his heart so openly. The cowboy stood tall, his weathered hat casting shadows over eyes that held not lust, but something steadier, quieter, something that spoke of long rides under endless skies, of scars both seen and hidden, and of a loneliness that could only be mended by more than fleeting touch. To the woman, every part of him seemed carved by hardship. The dust on his boots, the calluses on his hands, the lines on his face that told of battles fought both with guns and with silence. But beneath that rugged frame was something she had long believed no man of the West could possess, a tenderness that did not shrink from her pain, but leaned into it. And in that revelation, her accusation, once burning with anger, trembled with the weight of possibility. It was not a story of conquest, but of confrontation, between two souls scarred by a land that demanded more than it ever gave. In his words, the cowboy had placed a challenge before her: to believe that love, even in a world as unforgiving as the frontier, could still mean surrendering not just the body, but the heart, the fears, and the dreams. And for the first time, she wondered if the West could offer more than survival. Perhaps it could offer something rarer, something stronger. Perhaps, even here, she could be wanted for all that she was. The silence after his words was heavier than gunpowder smoke. No one in the saloon dared to laugh. No one dared to break the moment. The woman stood there, her chest rising and falling, her pride and her pain clashing like two storms inside her. She had heard promises before, empty vows whispered in the shadows of the night, meant to charm but never to stay. Yet this cowboy's voice carried something different. It was steady, unshaken, as though every mile he had ridden, every wound he had endured, had carved truth into his bones. She searched his face, hunting for the cracks where lies usually hid. His hands, scarred from years of work, did not fidget. His eyes did not shift. Instead, he looked at her, as though he was not waiting for her body, but for her answer. For the first time, she felt not like a prize to be won, but a soul to be chosen. The weight of that realization pressed against the wall she had built around herself. The cowboy's past was written in the dust of the frontier. He had lived years without warmth, sleeping beneath the stars where loneliness was his only companion. Women had crossed his path before, but none had stayed. He carried scars on his skin, yes, but deeper still were the scars on his heart. Marks left by betrayals and by nights spent wondering if he was doomed to always walk alone. Perhaps that was why his words now rang with such gravity. He did not need just her presence. He needed her essence, her truth, her entirety. The woman knew the West was not gentle. Men often came and went like storms, leaving destruction in their wake. She had survived by never believing too deeply, by keeping her heart sealed tighter than her fists. Yet something about this cowboy unsettled her defenses. It wasn't that he was different by appearance. Many men bore hats and spurs, but that his honesty cut deeper than charm ever could. She could see he was as weary of falsehood as she was. Still, fear whispered inside her. Could she risk surrendering even a piece of herself in a world where survival demanded caution? Could she believe that his words carried more than fleeting desire? The saloon still buzzed with anticipation, every ear tilted toward their exchange. But for her, it wasn't the crowd that mattered. It was the raw possibility that perhaps the cowboy's vow was the answer to the question she had never dared to ask. Was she worthy of being wanted for all she was? The cowboy did not push her for an answer. He simply stood there, a figure carved out of dust and silence, his presence steady as the mountains that loomed over the plains. His restraint was louder than insistence. In a land where men often demanded, his patience was a promise in itself. It was as though he was saying, "I will wait. I will not take what is not freely given." Her heart wrestled with the moment. Memories of other men clawed at her. Those who spoke with honeyed tongues but left her colder than before. Those who had taken parts of her and scattered them like broken glass across the desert of her soul. And yet, she could not deny that this cowboy's quiet stillness was mending something inside her. It felt less like a lure and more like a place to rest, a rare shelter in the wilderness of her life. The saloon's crowd, once rowdy, remained captive. Cards lay untouched on tables, glasses warmed in idle hands. Everyone could sense they were witnessing more than an argument between a woman and a man. It was something rare, something sacred, a collision of truth in a place built on lies. Even the bartender, who had seen countless promises spill across the counter like cheap whiskey, leaned in with wide eyes, waiting for her reply. The cowboy's voice finally broke the silence again, softer this time, as though meant for her ears alone. He spoke of long roads where the wind had been his only companion, of nights where the stars had looked down on him with indifference. "I've had the body of the West," he admitted. "Its fire, its danger, its fleeting touch. But what I want is the soul of a woman who won't fade with the dawn." His words fell heavy, not like an echo of rehearsed lines, but like stones laid carefully to build something lasting. Her defenses trembled. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with hunger, but with reverence. The accusation she had thrown at him now seemed fragile in her own hands, no longer a shield, but a test she had hoped he would fail. Yet here he stood, unbroken, not reaching for her body, but waiting for her heart. In that instant, she realized that perhaps the West, brutal as it was, could still hold room for love that went deeper than desire. The woman's breath grew unsteady as his words sank deeper. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss him as just another drifter with polished lines, but something inside her refused to let go of the silence between them. She saw no mockery in his face, no smugness in his stance. He wasn't boasting or begging. He was simply standing, offering himself with the same quiet courage it took to face down a storm on the open range. That kind of truth was rare in the West, and rarer still in the men who passed through it. Her life had been a battlefield long before this night. She had fought to be seen, fought to survive in a land where women were too often reduced to shadows in the corners of saloons or tools for men's fleeting desires. She had sharpened her voice into a blade, cutting down any man who dared to reduce her to nothing more than flesh. And yet, here was this cowboy, steady and unshaken, asking not for a piece of her, but for her entirety. It terrified her more than any insult or assault ever had, because it demanded she confront a question she had buried deep. What if she was more than she had believed? The cowboy, sensing her hesitation, did not press further. Instead, he lowered his hat slightly, as though to shield her from the weight of the crowd's stares. He gave her the dignity of privacy, even in the most public of places. That simple gesture told her more than words ever could. He wasn't trying to win the room. He was trying to win her trust. And in that moment, she realized that respect, not desire, had drawn him to her. Around them, the saloon breathed again. Glasses clinked, whispers stirred, but the tension lingered like the echo of a gunshot. Every soul in that room knew they had witnessed something raw and unpolished, something truer than the endless bluster and swagger that usually filled those walls. The West was a place of survival, but survival was not the same as living, and for the first time, The woman wondered if this cowboy could teach her the difference. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she wasn't ready to walk away either. And as the cowboy's eyes held hers, steady as the earth itself, she felt the faintest crack in the armor she had worn for so long. The days that followed were unlike any she had known. The cowboy didn't chase her, didn't corner her with demands or promises. He simply stayed. She saw him at the edge of town, helping mend a broken fence, or riding out at dawn to guide lost cattle back to their owners. He spoke to her not with flowery words, but with consistency, showing her through quiet actions that his vow in the saloon had not been a passing flame. And that constancy worked on her heart like rain softening stone. The woman, hardened by years of broken trust, tested him. She avoided him one day, watched him from a distance the next. She questioned him sharply, waiting for anger to flash in his eyes, waiting for the moment he revealed himself as no different than the rest. But his calm never wavered. He answered her doubts not with defensiveness, but with patience, as if he understood that her walls had been built not from pride but from pain. Slowly, she began to see pieces of his soul that matched her own. The loneliness in his silence mirrored the emptiness she felt each night when the saloon lights went dark. The scars on his hands spoke of battles fought not just with men, but with life itself. And when he spoke of longing, not for riches, not for fame, but for a place to belong, she recognized the same hunger that had lived in her since she was a girl abandoned to the harsh winds of the frontier. It wasn't grand gestures that began to win her trust. It was the way he carried himself when no one was watching, the way he treated strangers with dignity, the way he never looked at her as though she were a prize to be claimed. Slowly, her suspicion gave way to curiosity, and her curiosity to hope. And one night, when the town grew quiet and the stars spread like silver dust across the sky, she found herself walking toward him instead of away. She didn't know if she was ready to give him all of her, but for the first time, she wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had meant it when he said he wanted all of her, and not just her body. The night she approached him under the starlight, her steps were hesitant, her heart caught between fear and longing. The cowboy rose from where he had been sitting, his silhouette outlined against the soft glow of a campfire. He didn't smile, didn't speak too soon. He simply waited. For a woman who had lived her life surrounded by men who always reached before asking, his stillness was disarming. It was an invitation, not a demand, and it steadied the trembling in her chest. She sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the flames. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was heavy with meaning, as though words would only cheapen what was already understood. Finally, she whispered, her voice quieter than the crackle of burning wood, "Why me? There are women who would give you everything without a fight." The question carried years of disbelief, the weight of never being chosen for anything more than her beauty. The cowboy turned his gaze toward her, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Because you don't give yourself lightly," he answered. "Because what you hold back is what I've been searching for my whole life. I don't want easy. I want real. And you're as real as the West itself." His words sank into her like water into parched soil. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He was telling her a truth that felt as steady as the ground beneath their boots. She studied him, still afraid to trust, yet unable to dismiss the weight of his sincerity. The wall she had built around her heart trembled, not from weakness, but from the force of something stronger than fear. For so long she had believed no one could see past her body, past the armor of defiance she wore. Yet here was a man who looked at her, as though she was not a fragment to be possessed, but a whole to be cherished. The flames flickered between them, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to believe him. The thought was fragile, dangerous even, but it was there, hope, soft and trembling, daring her to open the door she had kept locked for so many years. In the days that followed, their bond grew in small, unspoken ways. He would leave water at her door after long shifts at the saloon, and she would mend a tear in his shirt without ever admitting it was her doing. These gestures, subtle as they were, spoke more than any declaration could. It was as if both of them were learning to walk again, each step testing the ground of trust beneath their feet. The town watched with curious eyes. Some mocked, whispering that she had finally been caught by a man's charm. Others nodded with quiet approval, sensing that what was unfolding was something deeper than the fleeting passions so common in the frontier. Yet neither of them seemed to care about the voices around them. They were bound by something silent, steady, and unshakable, as if the land itself bore witness to their unfolding story. The woman, once sharp with suspicion, began to soften. She still tested him, but now her tests came with a trace of vulnerability. She asked him about his past, about the battles he had fought and the nights he had spent alone under the stars. His answers were never glorified. He spoke plainly, with honesty that cut through the illusions she had grown used to. And in his honesty, she began to find pieces of herself reflected back. The cowboy, for his part, never stopped reminding her, not with grand speeches, but with steady presence, that he meant what he had said. Every time his eyes met hers, it was not with hunger, but with reverence. Every time he touched her hand, it was not to claim, but to reassure. Slowly, she realized that perhaps he did not just want her body, nor even just her heart. He wanted her scars, her fears, her dreams, the parts of her she had hidden even from herself. And though she was not ready to say it aloud, deep within, she began to believe him. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the West, where survival often demanded walls of stone around the soul, she found herself daring to imagine a future where she could lay those walls down and be seen, fully, completely, and without fear. The turning point came on a night when the wind howled across the plains, rattling shutters and carrying with it the threat of an oncoming storm. The saloon was near empty, most townsfolk huddled in their homes, but she remained, her duties keeping her until the late hours. As she stepped outside, rain began to spit against the dust, and there he was, waiting, leaning against the post as though the storm itself had called him to her side. She froze, not because she feared him, but because her heart no longer knew how to guard itself in his presence. "You didn't have to wait," she said, pulling her shawl tighter. Her voice trembled, but not from the cold. "I know," he replied simply, his hat tilted low to shield his eyes from the rain. "But I wanted to." Those 4 words pierced through every wall she had left. No man had ever chosen to stay without asking for something in return. It was the kind of truth too rare in her world, and it both frightened and steadied her all at once. They walked in silence through the storm, his stride matching hers, his coat lifted slightly to shield her from the harsh wind. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was steady, natural, as if his place had always been beside her. By the time they reached her door, she realized that his presence had become as familiar as the land itself, as if he had quietly carved himself into the very rhythm of her life. And that night, as thunder rolled over the horizon, she stood at her door and whispered words she never thought she would speak. "Maybe, I want you to. Not just tonight. Not just for now. For all of me." Her voice cracked, but the truth of it was stronger than any storm raging outside. The cowboy didn't rush to claim her confession. He simply lifted his gaze, meeting hers with the steady calm she had come to know. "Then let me prove it," he said, his voice carrying no urgency, only resolve. "Not in words, not in promises. In every day that comes." And he did. In the weeks that followed, their lives entwined, not through sudden passion, but through the slow, deliberate weaving of trust. He rode with her at dawn when the world was quiet, shared meals when the day's work had ended, and listened, truly listened, when she spoke of the wounds she carried. Where others had dismissed her pain, he honored it, treating her scars as part of the story he longed to hold. The woman, once known for her fire and sharp tongue, found herself softening in his presence, not because she lost her strength, but because she no longer needed to wield it as armor. With him, she could be vulnerable without fearing betrayal. And in that vulnerability, she discovered a freedom more powerful than defiance. The townsfolk began to notice the change. She smiled more often, laughed without bitterness, and carried herself with a confidence that came not from guarding her heart, but from knowing it was safe in another's hands. The cowboy, though quiet and unassuming, became a figure the town could not ignore, not because of his guns or his grit, but because of the way he cherished what others had overlooked. Together, they became a reminder in that hard land, that even in the dust and danger of the West, where survival demanded steel and suspicion, love could still take root. Not the fleeting kind born of hunger, but the kind that asked for all, body, soul, scars, and dreams, and gave all in return. But the West never allowed peace to rest for long. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a group of rough men rode into town, faces hard, eyes sharp with greed. They had heard the whispers, the stories of a woman once guarded by fire and mistrust, now walking beside a man who had tamed neither her body nor her spirit, but her heart. To them, it was weakness. To them, she was still something to be taken, and he was just another cowboy standing in their way. They cornered her outside the saloon, their words sharp as knives, mocking the notion that any man could want more than her beauty. "He fooled you," one sneered, "but we ain't here to pretend. We'll take what he's after and leave him with nothing." Their cruelty stung, not just because of the threat, but because it echoed the ghosts of every betrayal she had endured before. For a moment, the weight of her old fears threatened to crush her. Then the cowboy stepped into the street. His boots sank into the dust with the weight of quiet resolve, his hand resting not on his gun, but on the brim of his hat. His voice was calm, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You don't understand. I don't want a part of her. I want all of her. And you won't touch what isn't yours." His words weren't shouted, but the force in them cut through the air sharper than any bullet. The men laughed, circling him like vultures. But what they failed to see was that the woman was no longer the same as she once had been. She was not a prize to be won or a victim to be carried off. She was a soul that had finally been recognized, and in that recognition, she had found her strength. She stepped beside the cowboy, her eyes fierce, and for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. The standoff ended not in gunfire, but in silence. The raiders, faced with two people standing as one, with a unity that could not be broken by threats, faltered. Their mockery withered into unease, their bravado into retreat. They left the town in the same dust they had ridden in on, their shadows swallowed by the horizon. And for the first time, she understood the truth of his vow. It was not just his protection she had gained, but his unwavering presence, a love that made her stronger than she had ever been on her own. Life after that night carried a new weight, but it was not a burden. It was a foundation. The townsfolk, who had once whispered doubts, now spoke with respect. They had seen what it meant when a cowboy's words were more than empty promises. They had watched as a woman who had once stood alone with sharpened pride now walked with her head high, not because she was guarded, but because she was free. Together, they had rewritten what love could mean in a land built on dust and survival. The cowboy never stopped proving his vow. Each day he gave her more than words. He gave her time. He gave her patience. He gave her all of himself. And she, in turn, gave what she had once sworn no man would ever touch again, her trust. Their bond was not marked by grand gestures or fleeting fire, but by the steady rhythm of two souls finally finding rest in one another. In the evenings, when the saloon quieted and the prairie winds hushed, they would sit on the porch together, watching the stars spread wide over the endless sky. He would take her hand, rough against soft, and in the silence, she knew she had been wrong that first night. He hadn't wanted her body alone. He had wanted her laughter, her fears, her fire, her scars. He had wanted all of her, and he had given all of himself in return. The town, the land, the whole harsh West would continue to test them, but they no longer walked alone. And in a place where men and women were often broken by loneliness and betrayal, their story became a quiet legend, told not for its drama, but for its truth. That even in the dust and danger, love could be real, whole, and unyielding. For in the end, the cowboy's vow was not just words in a saloon. It was a truth lived every day, that real love does not ask for a piece, does not settle for fragments. Real love wants everything, body, soul, and spirit, and gives everything in return. And in that truth, they had found the rarest treasure the Old West had to offer. In the end, what began as an accusation in a crowded saloon became the foundation of something far greater. The woman who had once carried her wounds like armor found a man who did not fear them, but embraced them as part of her truth. And the cowboy, who had wandered through endless miles of dust and silence, finally found the one thing the West had denied him for so long: a home, not in a place, but in a soul. Their story was not about possession, but about recognition, the discovery that real love asks for nothing less than everything. Theirs was a bond tested by whispers, by storms, by men who tried to reduce her worth to flesh, and him to bravado. Yet every trial only proved what his first words had promised. He wanted all of her, her laughter, her scars, her fire, her silence. And in return, he gave all of himself, his strength, his patience, his unyielding presence. Together, they showed that in a land as harsh as the West, love could still be more powerful than fear. What makes their story unforgettable is not the drama of confrontations or the danger of enemies. It is the quiet truth at its heart, that even in the dust and danger, when life seems to demand hardness, two souls can still choose tenderness. And that choice, repeated each day, reshapes not just a life but an entire destiny. They prove that being truly wanted is not about desire, but about devotion, the kind that endures when beauty fades, when battles come, when silence falls. It leaves us with a question that lingers long after the tale is told. How often do we mistake fragments for wholeness? How often do we settle for being wanted in part, when the rarest treasure is to be wanted in full? The cowboy's vow reminds us that real love is not found in fleeting hunger, but in the courage to embrace another's entirety, their flaws, their fears, their fire, and their dreams. If this story moved you, share your reflections in the comments. Tell us what moment struck you most, or how it made you think about love in your own life. And if you want to keep walking these trails of the Old West, where legends are born not from guns, but from the human heart, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep these stories alive, carrying their truths into every dawn that rises.